Welcome to the Dice Tower!
And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vassell.
Conquest of Nerath. This is the Dungeons & Dragons board game. Now, this is not the first Dungeons & Dragons board game. There's been several of them. But this is the first one in which they are taking the battle and making it, well, risk style in a sense, where you have sweeping armies fighting one another. And we all like to fight and have war. She has a helmet. Well, anyway, the game itself is an incredible production. Wonderful, detailed little pieces. But there's been dozens and dozens and dozens of these games that have come along. Is this one going to break the mold and be something more? Let's take a look. First off, the production of this game is just absolutely superb. Here's a map, and on this map there are 4 armies fighting it out. Now you can play a free-for-all, but I highly recommend playing 2-on-2. You can have the, I'm going to pronounce all these names wrong. I always get a kick out of people who email me about fantasy names. You didn't know how to pronounce Valian? No. But anyway, I'm going to say yellow and gray forces. The Valian, they're basically the dwarfs. The elves, against the Nerathan, which are with the Nerathan, the humans and the dwarves. They're working together. Then you are fighting against Karkoth, which is your necromancers, and the Iron Circle, which are your goblins and orcs and all that stuff. So each player has a card, like I just showed you, and over here on the side of the board you can see that there's a victory point track, where if you were playing singly, each person would put a token, but you have these dual-sided tokens which you put here, and then you decide if you want to play a short game, 20 points, a medium game, 30 points, or capture the other person's capitals or win enough treasures. That's the long game. A 20-point game, which is what I would recommend, seems to take about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Now, each player puts a bunch of their starting forces all over the map. You have a card here which tells you which forces go where, but it's really convenient. If you look at the map itself, you can see that each of these locations here will show the forces that start in them. And it also shows the border of that force, and that is the person who controls it. And they did an absolutely superb job with this map, because each person has one of the 4 corners, but there's someone right in your face, right next to you. And so war can happen on the first turn, and it will happen on the first turn. So you can see there's different land spaces. This is impassable. The map doesn't wrap. But there's also space like this, you can see here, the Tomb of Horrors. And in this space you'll have guardians, or people in a dungeon that you're going to fight. For example, here is the Drider, but lots of the different monsters that you will know from D&D could be in here. We have a hill giant, we have the Cyclops, we have goblins, we have the wonderful black pudding, the ancient dragon, the giant spider, the troll, etc. And that's neat, and each of them has a few special abilities. Now, what you're doing in the course of this game is trying to get victory points. And there's 2 different ways, really, to get victory points. One is by conquering an enemy's territory. Every time you conquer an enemy's territory, you get a point, even if they take that territory back and you conquer it again. So once I conquer an enemy territory, I can put a token in to show that I've conquered it, and that will not only give me more income, because at the beginning of your turn, you get income for every territory you control. And they did a pretty neat thing on that too, I should mention. Because at the top here, it will tell you your base income here is 13 gold. So I know I have 13. I just subtract all the territories that have been captured from me, add all the ones that I've captured from my opponent, and you can easily find that out. Now, before I go any farther, I think the production of this game is top notch. Except these cards. They're great. They have a spot to put your deck of event cards and discard cards, but the problem is you're constantly wanting to look at your base income, and it's not, it's on the wrong side. And also, even though it has a sequence of play on the card, it doesn't tell you about each of the units. There's a separate card for that, and I suppose you can pass this one card around. But this card's supposed to hold the treasure cards on this side and everything else, or the treasure cards and everything on the other side, and then you can't see this. I wish they had put or on the board what each of the troops do. After a while, after playing the game, you understand what each of the troops do, but it would be a lot easier had they explained during the course of the game. During the game, each player is going to be drawing a card from their deck, and this is where each of the players is completely different. I mean, you have your startups, which are around the board, but the units are essentially the same, but your decks are different, and so you'll draw an event card. Sometimes it's a card you play immediately. Sometimes it's a card that, you know, this one says play at the start of a battle, choose a fighter until the end of the battle. That fighter rolls an extra 10-sided die. While this one here is a play immediately type of card. So you draw a card at the beginning of your turn, and then you'll move all the people, and each of them has a different move. They move 1, 2, or 3 spaces, depending on what figure it is. Then you fight your battles, then you can reposition some. Then you buy more units with the gold that you've gotten. And the gold in this game is gold bars. And it's in these cool looking shapes here in denominations of 1 and 5, very much like that. Then you get new income, and that's it. You just keep going. Now, let's take a look at the units, because this is where I think the game is really cool. If you look here, here's a smattering of the units that are involved in this game. Now, for many of the units, the castles, the ships, the storm elementals, and the wizards, those are all for the exact same models for each of the races. However, once you get to the monsters, the fighters, the regular troops, and the dragons, the models are quite different. Let's take, for example, the monsters. And here's the different monsters that you can have in this game. And so here I have a zombie Hulk, I have a golem, and I have a titan here. And I dropped the treant from the elves. Now, functionally, they're all the exact same. They all do the same thing, depending on what army. And I suppose one could argue and say it'd be better if they did different things in different armies. But for the most part, that's just a model that's different. And I don't mind that necessarily. Maybe in an expansion they could add more differences between the army. But I was already happy enough. Each of them has a very different skills and abilities. There's multiple different dice that are rolled in this game. 6, 8, 10, 12, and 20. For example, your regular troop rolls a 6-sided die, and since you need to roll a 6 or higher to hit something, that's not very useful. While the fighters and the wizards, they roll a 20-sided die, but that's not all. Fighters and wizards can also go into dungeons and fight the enemies there. When they go into a dungeon and fight the enemy in that dungeon, that enemy is going to roll the dice that are listed on the thing. So for example, here I have goblins with 2 6-sided dies. Or I might have a hill giant with 2 10-sided die. And so there's different monsters that you'll fight, but only fighters and wizards can go in. Wizards have first strike, so they get to roll their dice before everyone else does. Usually combat is simultaneous. And so wizards and fighters are much more useful than regular troops, but when you get hit, it's good to have regular troops to take out. Monsters roll a 12-sided die, which is fantastic. Monsters also, on the board, if you conquer an area with one of your monsters, he can run amok. And if there's an empty spot next to it, he can move into that territory and conquer that one also. Then you have the water elementals, which only roll 1 8-sided die on land, but once they get in the water, they roll 2 8-sided die. And since they can move over the water, that makes them much more useful. Ships can transport enemies around. Castles are great for defense. They roll 20-sided die on defense. Dragons are just awesome all around because not only can they move 3 spaces, but they roll a 20-sided die when attacking. And they can't land on the water, but since they can move pretty far, they are very deadly and dangerous. And so each of these units, you have to decide which of them you're going to buy. And you want to defeat the other armies, obviously, to get points. But you also want to defeat the denizens that are inside these dungeons, because then you will get treasures. And again, these treasures are treasures that you may recognize from things like, for example, here's Staff of the Magi. You can play this, and it gives you a property. From now on, when one of your wizards is destroyed, that wizard immediately rolls a 1d20 attack die. But also you can see that this staff gives me 2 victory points. And the more points it gives you, they give between 1, 2, or 3, the less useful it is. Here's the Hand of Vecna. At least not the head of Vecna, right? But anyway, once at the end of your turn, you can transfer one of your wizards from any friendly space to any other friendly space. And so the more these treasures you get, the more powerful your army can be. And so you are trying to, of course, wage war in a risk style, but also send enough of these fighters and wizards off to dungeons so that you can get these properties to better fight your opponents. It's a very strong fighting game where you're constantly in each other's face all the way to the end. I really like it. You know, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it, but it's a lot of fun. Now, like I said, there's a few things I think that could be improved. I wouldn't mind seeing some more abilities for each of the armies. The card decks are very different, though. I laid them out, compared them. They're very different. And I love the treasure deck, but there's so many things I like. I like the different units. I love rolling different dice for the different units. I like how they have different special abilities. There's no one unit that's just superior to everything else. I mean, obviously, dragons are the most powerful, but they cost 5 to put on the board. Foot soldiers are pathetic, but man, they can soak up hits, and I don't have to lose them. The dragon can take 2 hits, but still, after 2 hits, he's dead. The heroes and wizards, you need them to go first. Wizards rock with that first strike ability. A monster left unchecked can take out empty territories. The board is done in such a good way. Turtling is impossible. And that, ladies and gentlemen, right there is why I like this game. I love Nexus Ops. I do. Nexus Ops is a 4-player game done by Avalon Hill in which the players were encouraged to attack. And that's the way I like this one. You are encouraged to just get in someone's face, get in someone's face. There's no sitting off in the corner saying, well, build up and build up and build up to a strong. If you do that, you're going to lose because your territories are conquered, your money system's going down, and you're not getting enough points. Sending people off to the dungeons to fight the monsters is neat. The treasures are great. It's a good production. Now, I'm not going to say this is in the top 30 games of all time, but it's certainly in the top genre of this dudes on a map or plastic figures on a board or risk-style games that I've played. It's going to replace one of my favorites, I think. I'm going to get rid of, because when I have a rule that when I keep a game, I have to get rid of one, and I think this one's going to take the place of Shogun, the Samurai Swords, which I always thought was a great game, good production. I hate to give it up, but I like playing this one better.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.